What if I were to tell you I could completely shatter your reality?
Okay, go for it, go for it.
Check this out. We got the planet.
Yeah.
Starting at the pyramids in Giza, going across the Sahara, through the Atlantic Ocean, across South America, through the Pacific Ocean to Easter Island on the most remote opposite side of the planet. All the way back around, back to the pyramids, are 21 ancient, mysterious sites, all on the same line, with remarkable precision to one another, circling around the planet. And whoever was building the massive megalithic stonework, like what we find here in Egypt, South America, even on Easter Island, had the capability to quarry, move, and lift unbelievable large masses of rock above your head, and cut and shape the stone with such a level of precision that you can't fit a razor blade and in some places a human hair in between the blocks as they butt up to each other. Many, if not all of these sites, have remarkable connections and astronomical alignments with the stars in the sky, along with the sun and moon, along with sharing identical architecture, stone cutting, and locking techniques, making many of the walls earthquake-proof, which is why they have lasted as long as they have. And according to our current models of history that were taught in school, not only were these people and civilizations separated by vast distances and oceans, but also time. So they supposedly had absolutely zero contact with one another.
So
You want another one?
yeah, I want another one.
Imagine this. Imagine you're flying over top of Egypt, and you go directly above the Great Pyramid, the largest one of the three. And you look directly down to it, and you can see the entire pyramid perfectly. How many sides of the pyramid do you see?
You see our 4.
Most people say 4, because for the longest time we thought it was 4. But turns out, it has 8. At the center of each side, from top to bottom, there is another corner that concaves inwards towards the center of the structure, dividing that triangle on one side into 2, making it an 8-sided pyramid. This is why it's crazy that this structure is built this way. Let's imagine that we are going to build a 4-sided pyramid, that size, like the one sitting right next to it, consisting of 2.3 million individual multi-ton stone blocks, some of them up to the size of a minivan, weighing as much as a semi-truck. And the internal stones are cut so perfectly to one another that you can't fit a razor blade in between the blocks as they butt up to each other. If you were to cut one of those stones wrong, or just set it down wrong by a degree, each block after that, above it or around it, would then be wrong and gradually worsen in error as construction continued, causing the internals to warp, and if bad enough, making the entire pyramid bulge, lean, or spiral to a measurable amount, and not come to a perfect point with all of its corners, to that peak. Put 8 sides on your pyramid like the Great Pyramid, and you complicate the geometry of the structure so drastically mathematically that you are at least 8 times more likely to get that precision and symmetry wrong, to have all of these corners come to the peak so perfectly like the Great Pyramid. And that is just on a solid structure, if it was solid. That does not include the rooms and hallways on the inside. That intricacy is staggering. And what we were taught in school growing up is that the Old Kingdom Egyptians, 4,500 years ago, built this monument using copper chisels and stone hammers with sleds and boats because the wheel had not been introduced into Egypt yet. And they were able to do it from start to finish in 20 years. Here's a problem. If we today were going to replicate that building in 20 years, to meet that deadline, we would have to continuously place a perfectly cut stone perfectly every 5 minutes, 24 hours a day, non-stop for 20 years. And that level of precision, stamina, and speed is not achievable with our current economic systems, nor our technology today. Just the conveyor belt system of stone, to move it to the site, would take an industrial scale unprecedented in history, and this is just for one pyramid.
Yeah, you baffled me.
Oh,
You
dude,
win.
we are only scratching the surface of this story.
Oh. You... Wait, you got... Is there more?
Oh, there's so much more, dude.
Oh, carry on.
Can you look up a picture on Google Images?
Yes.
look this up on Google Images, what you should find are a bunch of temperature graphs. Just as long as where you can see it says Younger Dryas on it. Okay, so this is temperature data.
Ice core.
Sorry? Yes, ice core. Yes. This is temperature data we collect from ice core, from Greenland and the Antarctic, and we know what temperatures were a really freaking long time ago. But anyway, so the 15 at the bottom of the graph represents 15,000 years ago, which would have been during the peak of the last ice age, when massive megafauna like the mammoth roamed the earth, and glaciers 17 million square miles, 2 miles thick, covered the planet, causing the ocean levels back then to be 400 feet lower from where they currently are today, because all that water was frozen on land in the glacial ice. And then on the graph, you see at 13,000 years ago, we just get this abrupt spike in temperature, abruptly out of nowhere, that then plummets back down into freezing, and that freezing time period is called the Younger Dryas. And then abruptly comes right back out of that freezing cold and finally levels off into our modern warmer climate that we're currently experiencing today, called the Holocene. And from start to finish, that whole transition takes about 3,000 years. And by the time all of this was said and done, all of the glacial ice from the Ice Age melted rapidly, and all of that water had to go somewhere. So the ocean levels globally rose by 400 feet to where they are now in our modern day. And 12 and 11,000 years ago when this took place, humans just like you and I were walking the surface of the earth. And it would have appeared to whoever survived off of any coastline or island as if their entire world just went underwater. And it was this transition and event that gave birth to the Noah's Ark story within the biblical flood, along with all of the other world-destroying flood myths our species have been passing down for thousands of years all across our planet.
You're breaking my brain. So, why did it go up?
Look up another picture. So you should be looking at Younger Dryas boundary.
Yeah, I've got that.
Okay. You see like a bunch of dirt that it's like dug away and a black line running through the dirt. Okay. This black line separates the Pleistocene during the Ice Age to the Holocene, the past 10,000 years. Okay. Below this line, we find all of the fossils of the megafauna. None of that crosses above this line. But deep within this line of dirt, which is created from things burning, we find these objects called microspheres. Super, super tiny spheres. When you're holding it, like a clump of them in your hand, it just looks like salt. But super, super close, they're perfect circles. How these things were formed is that when an object going 44,000 miles per hour plunges into the crust of the Earth, the heat and pressure vaporizes what it's hitting, ejecting that mist of material up into the atmosphere that rapidly cools down into these little tiny spheres that eventually settles to the Earth. And this line dates to 13,000 years ago. We were hit by something from space. Now look at this. You should see a bunch of aerial photography of the East Coast United States that is littered in hundreds of thousands of these gigantic oval-shaped depressions. For the longest time, we had no idea these things existed, because they're so large you can't tell they're there just by standing on the ground. They were discovered when we started flying. After their discovery, they look like craters, so they began digging into the center of them looking for any type of extraterrestrial rock, but would always come up empty-handed. So it's been this big question mark as to what the heck formed these things for the longest time. And the current geological explanation that they're teaching is that during the Ice Age, wind coming off of the Laurentide ice sheet, the huge glacier that was sitting on top of Canada, blowing into the United States, blew against lakes and bodies of water to make it circulate to create these ovals. I don't think that makes any sense at all.
That don't make any sense.
Yes. Okay, yeah. But someone who was studying them figured out that they are these oval shapes, and so he drew a line through them and extended it outward to figure out where they're all pointing to. So now type in craters at the end of what you have there, and you should see, there should be a satellite image of the United States with a whole bunch of yellow lines all converging into one spot, right? Okay, this is where all of them are pointing to, and there's some of them in the west mid-United States, pointing all towards Michigan, directly crossing where Saginaw Crater is located in Michigan Lake. This evidence of a cosmic impact, along with this, because what happened is, what they think happened is that it was a comet. It's like this big object that's always breaking apart and making this tail of debris. And if the Earth passes through that tail, it gets hit. It's a bombardment from space. And one of those big objects plunged into the 2-mile thick glacier, sitting on top of Michigan and ejected trillions of tons of ice into the atmosphere. We're talking objects the size of cars, houses, and baseball stadiums getting launched into the sky in all directions. And all of that debris would eventually fall back to the planet, pelting the ground so violently the scars can still be seen today. And that's what formed these craters, which is why they're all pointing to the same spot. And why we find no material at the bottom of them, because it was ice. It just melted away. And it was this transition and event that violently brought the Earth out of the last ice age, causing that massive fluctuation to the Holocene.
So why is there no rock under that crater?
It's under a lake, so nobody's been able to find anything underneath there. A comet is not as dense as a meteor. Meteors are normally made up of rock and like metals, like iron. A comet, think of it like a really dirty snowball, where most of it is like icy gas with a few pieces of rock in there. So most of it is burnt up in the atmosphere. It's like a nuclear bomb going off in the sky. The last one that hit us was back in 2013 over top of Russia. Came into the atmosphere going 33,000 miles per hour. Super fast. It had the equivalent of 20 Hiroshima nuclear bombs going off in the sky.
Нихуя себе, это что такое? О, нихуя метеорит, блядь.
That was a speck of dust. And it blew out building windows, caved in rooftops, and shattered the ears of people around it, and gave people burns from the heat.
Я сейчас подойду, подожди.
And that didn't even hit the ground. It blew up in the sky. And all these little tiny pebbles of debris came raining down because it had blown up and exploded in the sky. So it's honestly very rare that an object actually hits the surface of the Earth, because all of it really matters. Here, let me grab my globe. If we imagine an object coming into the planet and it comes in at this steep angle, it's now passing through a whole bunch more atmosphere than if it was coming straight towards it, right? Because it's got that angle to it. And most of the objects are coming in at this angle, so much stuff gets burnt up in the atmosphere and never hits the ground. And back during the Cold War, when everybody all of a sudden got nuclear bombs, they built these devices to listen for a nuclear bomb going off. And they heard them going off all the time. And they're like, who's blowing up these bombs? Well, come to find out, it wasn't human. It was objects entering the atmosphere over top of the ocean. We're getting hit.
So it happens a lot more than we know.
It's happening all the time. Yeah, but it's just little tiny freckles of debris coming through the air. But sometimes they're really freaking big. Now imagine this. Let's imagine that our civilization experiences some kind of cataclysmic event where the whole planet restarts, right? Where our civilization ends, electricity goes out, we can't turn it back on, and there's an extinction level event that decimates the planet, right? But let's imagine that you survived the initial devastation and you're surviving with a group of people. And things are going pretty good for you, all things considered. And you have your tribe, and you adapt to your new world. You grow older, you have kids, things are going pretty good, and you turn into this old man. And then randomly, out of nowhere one day, unexpected, a military plane screeches across the sky from horizon to horizon. And you had no idea anyone still had the ability to fly them. It's been so long since you've seen one. And now here you are, trying to explain to your terrified children and your grandchildren of what a plane is. You explain what's made of, its function, its history to the best of your understanding, and let's say you draw a picture for them to the best of your capabilities on whatever material you have available to you, because your children have never seen a plane before, and all they would ever have seen was this mysterious small winged thing roaring across the sky. Time goes by, and you, along with everyone else who knows what a plane is, would eventually die. And now here are your children and your grandchildren explaining to their children of what a plane is, to their best memory from what you told them. And thankfully, they have your drawing, because now there's no visual in the sky. So, this story of a plane that you have constructed and put an image to now gets passed down from generation to generation by this ever technologically devolving and understanding group of people for 12,000 years. And by the end of those 12,000 years, the picture you had drawn is long gone. No one knows where that is. Your image and name have been changed in some way, more than likely deified, and the plane flying overhead has become a fire-breathing dragon. Your original description of a plane has been completely warped into this mythological story that doesn't make any sense anymore by itself, because it is just the frantic attempt to try to remember the previous story of a 12,000-year-long telephone game. And this would explain the confusion, contradiction, and mysticism behind all of these ancient stories our species have been passing down for thousands upon thousands of years. Because this is just our attempt to try to remember our ancestors' stories. And we also must consider the corruption of our species, always looking for a way to manipulate and control the people, and what better way to do so than to warp and suppress the truth, hence the birth of religion, in my opinion. So, instead of arguing with who has the correct story, like we've been doing for thousands of years, killing one another over and getting nowhere, we should back up and view all of these ancient myths and stories at the same time, to where we can now find and make the connections in which they all share. For an example, the biblical flood, the Noah's Ark story. Well, not only is this a cataclysmic, world-destroying flood myth, but so is the story of Atlantis. And there are hundreds, if not thousands at one point, of these world-ending flood myths all across the planet from every continent and culture. And these stories are the PTSD memory of that horrific event 12,000 years ago when the glaciers melted, peeking its way out from behind the shadows of myth.
So that it's just a passed on story.
Yeah.
I don't know if I like that. It's odd.
It makes sense, though.
It makes sense. And that's the scary thing.
I know, right? Look up this picture now.
Oh, it's cataract. Okay.
This is in Washington State. You know Niagara Falls?
Yeah.
Okay, that is a cataract. That the shape that water is making is called a cataract. And as that water comes across that cliff face, it erodes at the bedrock, digging this trench out in the earth. Niagara Falls is 1,000 feet across. Potholes Cataract is 11 times the size of Niagara Falls. It's 1.5 miles wide by 2 miles long by 800 and in some places 1,000 feet deep. How this was formed is that as the glacial ice was melting from the temperature fluctuation, the water would pool into huge, massive lakes on top of the glacial ice that still existed and the land formations until it could no longer hold back the weight of all of that water and break, releasing the most cataclysmic floods you could ever possibly imagine down the landscape. Think of like a building-sized wave several kilometers across, tearing across your neighborhood at really, really freaking fast. Everything would be gone. The very bedrock of the earth is but sand to that quantity of water. The unit of measurement that they use for it, that amount of water, is called a sverdrup. And it's 250 million cubic feet of water per second coming down the landscape. Now look this one up. Camus Prairie ripples. So when you're standing in about like knee-high body of water, swiftly moving current of water, the tallest ripple you would find on the bottom would probably be like, about the size of your thumb at most in length. These ripples going through Montana are taller than buildings, spanning for like several miles across and just going on for forever when you find them all. The only other place we find ripple sediment deposits like this is on the bottom of the oceans. And these are only 2 land formations of thousands that I could show you, which is the permanent scarring on the surface of the earth from the biblical flood.
So, what you're suggesting is that it's kind of changed land and the sea.
Oh yeah. The whole planet changed. Everything during the Ice Age, Africa was green with an abundance of fauna. And once the temperatures got super warm, warmer places got super hot and everything died. So imagine what could possibly be out there underneath that 3 million square mile 100 to sometimes 150 feet pool of sand, ocean of sand.
Oh. A lot.
Yeah.
Oh, what's even under the ocean? Like, just
Great question.
not-
Think of this. Think of this. Imagine if our civilization existed during the Ice Age, hypothetical, where we experienced this event, where objects entered into the atmosphere, massive nuclear bombs essentially going off in the sky, burning 10% of the biomaterial on the surface of the Earth. Imagine the Amazon and half of the United States all burning at the same time, causing a massive melting of the glacial ice, resulting in huge, horrendous floods, never-ending torrential rain, and hurricane winds on a scale you couldn't possibly imagine. With massive earthquake and volcanic activity, with the ocean levels globally rising by 400 feet over a period of time, and 127 species of megafauna go extinct. That would really freaking suck. But now let's imagine, think of the closest city to a coastline you know of. Imagine that city going underneath 400 feet of water and then just sitting there for 12,000 years. And to give you some perspective, the Titanic has been underwater for over 100 years now. And at its current rate of decay, give it another 500, no, let's say 2,000 years for enough time, and you would no longer recognize there was ever a steel boat even there. It is dissolving into this lump, and the ocean floor is eventually just going to consume it, vanishing from the planet. And in fact, where it's at, it's being more preserved. If it was closer to the surface where more sunlight could get to it, far more ocean life would be growing all over it. So there might still be a boat there, but you couldn't tell. It just looks like the ocean floor. So everything off of every coastline and island disappears under hundreds of feet of water for 12,000 years. We could probably agree at that point that most, if not everything, would either be completely gone or unrecognizable to whoever would exist later if they searched the oceans to begin with. And like you mentioned earlier, we've only searched 8% of the oceans today. So, the only thing any survivors, if they made it that far and long, would still see from us would be whatever was still on land. And the only material, if it wasn't destroyed, changed, or manipulated by the future cultures to move into these areas, that maybe might retain a glimpse of what it was before through the thousands upon thousands of years of natural erosion it's about to go through, would be whatever we carved from stone, like Mount Rushmore and the ruins of Hoover Dam, in the Americas at least. And all we have from our ancient past is what they carved from stone. And they're the greatest structures this planet has ever seen, and has never seen again since.
So you're suggesting again, what is happened now has already happened in the past,
Yeah,
but maybe better in the past.
we can't do this.
So yeah, better in the past. But then that event reset everything.
Humans during the Ice Age were a global civilization, I would argue like we are today, but even greater. And it wasn't our civilizations starting around 11,000 years ago, but restarting from a cataclysmic event so destructive and devastating it almost made our species go extinct like it did the mammoth. And we are the descendants of the survivors.
It all makes sense. Like, it makes sense that what was in the past is gone because it's all under the ocean and stuff.
Yeah,
And how all the myths we have came from just stories passed on.
exactly. And then people think that it's just this made-up tale that has no meaning anymore, and we are forgetting the past.
Is there anything about Atlantis that I don't know?
We get the story of Atlantis from the Greek philosopher Plato, and historians and academics claim that Plato, he made it up as a metaphor for his time, which is why it is renowned as myth and not taken seriously in our academic world, resulting in it being portrayed as this joke in our pop culture that they make movies out of. Well, if we read Plato's writing from his Timaeus and Critias, and states the story to be true, he gives the sinking date for Atlantis to be 9,000 years prior to the Greek philosopher Solon's travels to Egypt. And we know when that dude existed. Solon was one of Plato's ancestors and a lawmaker. He lived between 600 and 500 BC. So, if we subtract back in time 9,000 years from when Solon lived, That puts us at 11,600 and 800 years ago, which was directly in the middle of that massive cataclysmic shift in climate, melting the glaciers from the Ice Age and raising ocean levels globally 400 feet.
Where the change in ocean and land happened.
Yeah. So if he made up the story, it would have to be a coincidence that he gives the exact event and date for the world-ending flood that changed everything. Now look up another picture.
A bit of a coincidence. Okay.
Actually, let me pull out something real quick.
I've saw this before.
The Recon Structure. Okay, so we found this in 1965 on the Gemini 4 space mission when they were orbiting the planet for the first few times. And it's massive, which is why we didn't know it was there. It's 24 miles across at its widest. And they thought it was an impact crater or something hit the Earth. Geologists eventually went to the site and they found geothermal heated water underneath the crust of the Earth at its center, suggesting volcanic activity, like hot springs and geysers, right? So it's currently believed that it's a collapsed volcanic dome where the ground had upheaved into this massive bubble and then collapsed to create this ring, and did it several times to create the pattern we see here. So fair enough, it's an ancient volcano. I'm not saying it's not an ancient volcano, but the dimensions and description Plato gives for the city of Atlantis is that it was a 127 stadia width ring island, which translates to 14 miles, with a moat in the center, with another ring island, with another moat, with a circular island at its center, where the great palaces of architecture were located, where the people would bathe in natural springs of fresh, warm water. And the Recon Structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara, has this exact same bullseye-shaped appearance, and the widest ring of that center formation is 14 miles across. And if you scroll through and find a more zoomed out, like satellite image of the area, you can see massive water streaks running through the desert, showing that at one point this entire site was underwater. Now, as some dude you just met off Omegle, I have no idea if it's actually Atlantis. I've never been there. But this is why I believe. Remember this, right?
It's on the line.
The line.
No, that's scary.
Step out of the box now.
Okay. Or out the box.
From here on, I can't really back up anything I'm about to say. This is my own speculation.
Okay.
But given the example of the biblical flood, we have to reconsider many of these ancient stories now. Because in my opinion, they're no longer made up fiction anymore, like many claim they are, and I once did. So the next big obvious thing in many of these myths, if not all of them, is a god of some kind. Or a deity, or some kind of deities. Well, whether or not they're speaking of a real supernatural being, I have no idea, and I don't claim they are. But since many of the figures and characters from these stories share many of the same features and characteristics with one another from cultures all across the planet separated by oceans, we could possibly say that they might be speaking of someone. And specifically, in the ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablets, the oldest writing from our ancestors that we have found so far, that the Bible actually borrows from their flood myth called the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the character Itnupishtim is Noah in the biblical narrative. They say that when the flood came that destroyed everything, the gods left the planet. It was so devastating, and argued amongst themselves why they allowed it to happen and wept in the heavens. Well, if there was a technologically advanced race of human beings during the Ice Age, and they saw that destruction coming, could we not translate this as survivors escaping? So let's stick with that. They get their Elon Musk of the time to build a starcraft, and they launch a bunch of people out into space where they think they're going to survive. And those people are gone for 3,000 years, and the whole world just eats shit, right? They eventually return back to the planet, and they find nothing but a barren wasteland of what was before, along with the descendants of the survivors, who are just Stone Age people now, with no memory of what was before, only these myths that their ancestors have been passing down for thousands of years of the times before. These primitive people have also adopted the ruins of the previous civilization and have built on top and around these scars, leaving their fingerprints on them, just like the pyramids in Giza. So if we imagine an ancient group of people standing there in Egypt as a ball of light emerges from the sky and two people walked out and start talking with them, they would absolutely believe that those are some of the gods from their myths, or some kind of angel at least. And the word angel translates from Hebrew as messenger. And where do angels come from but the heavens? And heaven has been depicted as up by thousands of cultures for thousands of years in their art and writing, and up is also the direction of space. So by definition, angels are extraterrestrials. And if this group of people who fled the planet long ago have been separated from our genetic code for 12,000 years up until present day, while traversing space and time, they would absolutely start to show genetic differences from us. I might even say alien. Which explains two of the big problems a lot of people have with aliens. The first one is that if it's an alien, it first off would have to evolve on another planet, become technologically advanced enough to traverse space, and then find us to begin with. And all of that by itself is astronomically low to happen, apparently. But let's say they did achieve all of that, and they showed up here, and we're getting all these stories of people being abducted by these dudes with 2 eyes, 2 arms, 2 legs. Why on Earth, if it was a species that evolved in another atmosphere, in another gravitational field, why would it look like anything here on Earth?
Yeah.
Well, they got here because we never went very far away. And they're humanoid because they are us.
Just more evolved.
In a different way.
Yeah. There's a lot I think they're not telling us anyway.
Oh, 100%, bro. Absolutely.
It is 2 a.m. and you've blown my mind.
I told you. Let me give you this last little bit, and then I'm gonna let you head out of here because that sounds late. Okay.
All right.
Let's again imagine worst case scenario for us. Let's imagine a massive object enters the atmosphere going 44,000 miles per hour, super fast, plunges into the Earth. The very surface of the Earth would change again, and our entire empire and everything we have built will fall again. And it's not going to be us living in these massive, populated, comfortable places who would survive for very long on a geological sense of time. We would disappear relatively quickly. The ones to possibly survive and adapt to this new environment that came after would be the hunter-gathering tribes that exist with us today, like in the Amazon. They already know how to survive with nothing. They've been doing it for thousands of years. They too would also experience this cataclysmic event and go to tell that story to their descendants. And let's say years go by, and out of nowhere, randomly one day, you as a survivor shows up in their camp. And if they don't kill you and eat you to begin with, because they're all probably starving, they might try to go on to live with you. And you don't look like anyone else, and no one understands a word you're saying. And you're trying to explain to these people as to where the heck you came from. Well, no matter how hard you tried, even if you drew like pictures in the sand with a stick, no matter how passionate you were on trying to get these people to understand, they don't have the cognitive capability to understand what they're being told. They've never seen a city before, a car, a plane, a light bulb, medicine. Anything you did get through to them in any substantial way would sound like a mystical story from the beginning. And it would be their descendants that would go on to speak of the time before. The time when the gods walked the earth, healing the sick, creating remarkable buildings, having the ability to fly and even go to the moon. And in time, even we will become myth, and the cycle will start again. And if a fraction of anything I've just told you is true, and by God, there is so much more, our entire model of history and who we are as a species will completely change. For we will no longer be the center point, the peak of technology, or the giants we claim to be. For there is something far greater over this horizon, and it will shatter your reality.
I like that. I'm gonna quick drop you a follow on to TikTok and YouTube.
Go for it.
That was good. That was very good. I feel like it was probably TikTok I did see in the first place.
You might have.
So you'll definitely be TikTok. I saw you. Okay. Oh, okay. And you famous. Okay.
Apparently.
You've literally blown mine and my two friends' mind this whole
Oh, is
time.
your friend watching too?
Has been watching this as
hi,
well.
friend.
He's like me. He has no idea. Blow my mind.
Well, I'm gonna let you head out of there now.
I'm probably gonna get to
Okay,
bed.
my dude.
I'll see you
Later.
later.